Hello and welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. Make certain to hit the like and subscribe button, and that way you can be updated on videos like this one when I go live. So we are continuing our story time. I'm going to wait till we get a little bit more people joining me here. Oh, that's right. I need to go share it. I forget that. Okay, let's see. We'll go here. We'll go into my account. Oops, let's see. Library, live. Turn that down and share this one. Share, copy link. We will go over here to the Facebook. I see we've got two people here. Hello, my darlings. We'll publish that one. And then when that one comes up, I'll share it on the regular Facebook. Okay. So can everyone hear me properly? I don't know if you can. If you are here, I've got the fan on. Does that bother you? Because it's very warm tonight. Let's see. Let's see if we've got 5 people. Hello, darlings. I'm just checking to see if can you hear me, or is the fan too loud? Okay. We've got 6 people. Now, the thing is, I'm going to turn my volume way back up. Oh. Now, this way, in case you cannot hear me, in case I do what I did last week and I'm reading it and you can't hear me. So, the thing will cut off. So I'll turn it on so I'll be able to ding myself. So forgive me for not dressing properly. It is so hot here today. I'm not even buttoned all the way. I think I might be able to turn the fan down just a little though. Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off before. Let's see, where the camera's cut off, and let's see, where were we? Chapter 13. Chapter 13. Left with myself and Lucio, Lord Elton threw off all reserve and became not only familiar, but fawning in his adulation of us both. An abject and pitiable desire to please and propitiate us expressed itself in every look and word. I firmly believe that if I had coolly and brutally offered to buy his fair daughter by private treaty for £100,000, that sum to be paid down to him on the day of marriage, he would have gladly agreed to sell. Apart, however, from his personal covetousness, I felt and knew that my project courtship of Lady Sybil would be of necessity resolve itself into something more or less of a market bargain. Unless, indeed, I could win the girl's love. I meant to try this and do this, but I fully realized how difficult, nay, almost impossible it would be for her to forget the fact of my unhampered and vast fortune, and consider me for myself alone. Herein is one of the blessings of poverty, which the poor are frequently too apt to forget. A moneyless man, if he wins a woman's love, knows that such love is genuine and unattained by self-interest. But a rich man can never be truly certain of love at all. The advantages of a wealthy match are constantly urged upon all marriageable girls by both their parents and friends. And it would have to be a very unsophisticated feminine nature indeed that could contemplate a husband possessing 5 millions of money without a touch of purely interested satisfaction. A very wealthy man can never be sure even of friendship, while the highest, strongest, and noblest kind of love is nearly always denied to him. In this way, carrying out the fulfillment of those strange but true words, how hardly shall how he that is rich man enter the kingdom of heaven. The heaven of a woman's love, tried and proved true through disaster and difficulty, of her unflinching faithfulness and devotion in days of toil and bitter anguish, of her heroic self-abnegation, sweetness and courage through the darkest hours of doubt and disappointment. This bright and splendid side of woman's character is reserved by divine ordinance for the poor man. The millionaire can indeed wed whomever he so pleases among the beauties of the world. He can deck his wife in gorgeous apparel, load her with jewels, and look upon her in all the radiance of her richly adorned loveliness, as one may look upon a perfect statue or matchless picture, but can never reach the deeper secrets of her soul or probe the well springs of her finer nature. I thought this, even thus early in the beginning of my admiration for Lady Sybil Elton, though I did not then dwell upon it as I have often done since. I was too elated with pride of wealth to count the possibilities of subtle losses amid so many solid gains, and I enjoyed the full, and with somewhat contemptuous malice, the humble prostration of a belated earl before the dazzling mine of practically unlimited cash as represented to him in the persons of my brilliant comrade and myself. I took a curious sort of pleasure in patronizing him, and addressed him with a protecting air of indulgent kindness, whereat he seemed gratified. Inwardly I laughed, as I thought how differently matters would have stood, supposing I had been indeed no more than an author. I might have proved to be one of the greatest writers of the age, but if what that I had been poor, or only moderately well off, the same half-bankrupt earl who privately boarded an American heiress for 2,000 guineas a year would have deemed in condescension to so much as invite me to his house, would have looked down upon me from his titled nothingness, and perhaps carelessly alluded to me as a man who writes, yes, rather clever, I believe, and then would have thought no more about me. For this very cause, as author still, though millionaire, I took a fantastic pleasure in humiliating his lordship as much as possible, and I found the best way to do this was to talk about Willowsmere. I saw that he winced at every name of his lost estate, and that notwithstanding this, he could not avoid showing his anxiety as to my intentions with regards to its occupation. Lucio, whose wisdom and foresight had suggested my becoming the purchaser of the place, assisted me in the most adroit fashion to draw him out, and to make his character manifest, and by the time we had finished our cigars and coffee, I knew that the proud Earl of Elton, who could trace his lineage to the earliest days of the Crusaders, was as ready to bend his back and crawl in the dust for money as the veriest hotel porter expectant of his sovereign tip. I had never entertained a high opinion of the aristocracy, and on the occasion it was certainly not improved, but remembering that the spendthrift nobleman beside me was the father of Lady Sybil, I treated him on the whole with more respect than his mean and grasping nature deserved. On returning to the drawing room after dinner, I was struck by the chill weirdness that seemed to be imparted to it by the addition of Lady Elton's couch, which, placed near the fire, suggested a black sarcophagus in bulk and outline. It was practically a narrow bed on wheels, though partially disguised by silk coverlet draped skillfully to as somewhat hide its coffin-like shape. The extended figure of the paralyzed countess herself presented a death-like rigidity, but her face, as she turned it towards us on our entrance, was undisfigured as yet, and distinctly handsome. Her eyes, especially being large and clear, almost brilliant, her daughter introduced us both in low tone. She moved her head slightly by way of acknowledgement, studying us curiously the while. "Well, my dear," said Lord Elton briskly, "this is an unexpected pleasure. It is nearly 3 months since you've honoured us in this company. How do you feel?" "Better," she replied slowly, yet distinctly, her gaze now fixed with wondering intenseness on Prince Reminis. "Mother found the room rather cold," explained Lady Sybil, "so we brought her as near to the fire as possible. It is cold," and she shivered. "I fancy it must be freezing hard." "Where is Diana?" asked the Earl, looking about in search of the lively young lady. "Miss Chesney has gone to her own room to write a letter," replied his daughter, somewhat frigidly. "She will be back directly." At this moment, Lady Elton feebly raised her hand and pointed to Lucio, who moved to answer some question asked of him of Miss Charlotte. "Who is that?" she murmured. "Why, mother dear, I told you," said Lady Sybil gently. "That is Prince Lucio Jimenez, Papa's great friend." The Countess' pallid hand still remained lifted, as though it were frozen in air. "What is he?" the slow voice again inquired, and then the hand dropped suddenly like a dead thing. "Now, Helena, you must not excite yourself," said her husband. Oh, that was he. "Now, Helena, you must not excite yourself," said her husband, bending over her couch with real or assumed anxiety. "Surely you remember all I have told you about the prince, and also about this gentleman, Mr. Geoffrey Tempest?" She nodded, and her eyes, turning reluctantly away from Menendez, regarded me fixedly. "You are a very young man to be a millionaire," were her next words, uttered with evident difficulty. "Are you married?" I smiled, and answered in the negative. Her looks wandered from me to her daughter's face, then back to me again, with singularly intent expression. Finally, the potent magnetism of Lucio's presence again attracted her, and she indicated him by gesture. "Ask your friend to come here and speak to me." Jimenez turned instinctively at her request, and with his own peculiar charm and gallant grace of bearing, came to the side of the paralyzed lady, and taking her hand, kissed it. "Your face, it seems so familiar to me," she said, speaking now, as it seemed, with greater ease. "Have I ever met you before?" "Dear lady, you may have done so," he replied in the dulcet tones and with the most captivating genteelness of manner. "It occurs to me, now I think of it, that it was years ago I saw once, as a passing vision of loveliness, in the heyday of youth and happiness, Helena Fitzroy, before she was Countess Elton." "You must have been a mere boy, a child at that time," she murmured, faintly smiling. "Not so. You're still young, madam, and I am old. For you look incredulous. Alas, why is it, I wonder, I may not look the age I am? Most of my acquaintances spend a great part of their lives in trying to look the age they are not, and I never came across a man of 50 who was not proud to be considered 39. My desires are more laudable, yet honourable eld refuses to impress itself upon my features. It's quite a sore point with me, I assure you." "Well, how old are you really?" asked Lady Sybil, smiling at him. "Ah, I dare not tell you," he answered, returning the smile. "But I ought to explain that my countings I judge age by the workings of thought and feeling more than by the passing of years. Thus it should not surprise you to hear that I feel myself old, old as the world. But there are scientists who say the world is young, I observed, and that it is only now beginning to feel its forces and put forth its vigor. Such optimistic wiseacres are wrong, he answered. The world is a veritable husk of a planet. Humanity has nearly completed all its allotted phases, and the end is near. The end? Echoed Lady Sybil. Do you believe the world will come to an end? I do, most certainly. Or to be more correct, it will not actually perish, but simply change. And the change will not agree with the constitution of this present inhabitants. They shall call the transformation of the day judgment. I should imagine it would be a fine sight. The Countess gazed at him wonderingly. Lady Sybil seemed amused. I would rather not witness it, said Lord Elton gruffly. Oh, why? And Jimenez looked about with quite a cheerful air. A final glimpse of the planet ere we ascend or descend to our future homes elsewhere would be something to remember. Madame, here he addressed Lady Elton, are you fond of music? The invalid smiled gratefully and bent her head in acquiescence. Miss Chesney had just entered the room and heard the question. Do you play? She exclaimed vivaciously, touching him on the arm with her fan. He bowed. I do, in an erratic sort of fashion. I also sing. Music has always been one of my many passions. When I was very young, many years ago, ages ago, I used to imagine I could hear the angel Israfel chanting his strophes amid the golden glow of heavenly glory. Himself, white-winged and wonderful, with a voice outringing beyond the verge of paradise. As he spoke, a sudden silence fell upon us all. Something in his accent touched... Where did I go? Sorry. A sudden silence fell upon us all. Something in his accent touched my heart to a strange sense of sorrow and yearning, and the Countess of Elton's dark eyes, languid with long suffering, grew soft as though we repressed tears. Sometimes, he continued more lightly, just at odd moments, I like to believe in paradise. It is a relief, even to a hardened sinner like myself, to fancy that there may exist something in the way of the world better than this one. Surely, sir, said Miss Charlotte Fitzroy severely, you do believe in heaven? He looked at her and smiled slightly. Madam, forgive me. I do not believe in the clerical heaven. I know you will all be angry with me for this frank confession, but I cannot picture the angels in white smocks with goose wings or a deity as somewhat excitable personage with a beard. Personally, I should decline to go to any heaven which has only a city with golden streets, and I should object to a sea of glass, resenting it as a want of invention and a part of creative intelligence. But do not frown now, Miss Fitzroy. I do believe in heaven all the same, a different kind of heaven. I often see it in my dreams. He paused, and again we were all silent, gazing at Lady Sybil's eyes, indeed, rested upon him with such absorbed interest that I became somewhat irritated and was glad when, turning towards the Countess once more, he said quietly, Shall I give you some music now, madame? She murmured assent and followed him with a vaguely uneasy glance, and he crossed over to the grand piano and sat down. I had never heard him either play nor sing. In fact, so far as his accomplishments went, I knew nothing of him, as yet except that he was perfect master of the art of horsemanship. With the first few bars he struck, I half started from my chair in amazement. Could a mere pianoforte produce such sounds, or was there some witchery hidden in the commonplace instrument, unguessed by any other performer? I stared around me, bewildered. I saw Miss Charlotte drop her knitting abstractedly. Diana Chesney Lying lazily back in one corner of the sofa, half closed her eyelids in dreamy ecstasy, Lord Elton stood near the fire, resting one arm on the mantelpiece and shading his fuzzy brows with his hand, and Lady Sybil sat beside her mother, her lovely face pale with emotion, while on the worn features of the invalid lady there was an expression of mingled pain and pleasure difficult to describe. The music swelled into passionate cadence. Melodies crossed and recrossed each other like rays of light, glittering among green leaves. Voice of birds and streams and tossing waterfalls chimed in with song of love and playful merriment. Anon came the wilder restraints of grief and angry clamor. Cries of despair were heard echoing through the thunderous noise of some relentless storm. Farewells lastingly shrieked amid sobs of reluctant shuddering agony. And then, as I listened, before my eyes a black mist gathered slowly, and I thought I saw great rocks bursting asunder into flame, and drifting islands in a sea of fire. Faces, wonderful, hideous, beautiful, peered out at me, out of darkness denser than night, and in the midst of this there came the tune, complete in sweetness and suggestion, a piercing sword-like tune that plunged into my very heart, and ranked there. My breath failed me, my senses swam. I felt that I must move, speak out, cry, and implore that this music, this horribly insidious music, should cease ere I swooned with voluptuous poison of it. When with a full chord of splendid harmony that rolled out upon the air like breaking wave, the intoxicating sounds ebbed away into silence. No one spoke. Our hearts were yet beating too wildly with the pulsations roused by that wondrous lyric storm. Diana Chesney was the first to break the spell. "Well, that beats everything I've ever heard," she murmured tremulously. I could say nothing. I was too occupied with my own thoughts. Something in the music had instilled itself into my blood, or so I had fancied. And the clinging subtle sweetness of it moved me to strange emotions that were neither wise nor worthy of a man. I looked at Sybil. She was very pale. Her eyes were cast down, and her hands were trembling. On a sudden impulse I rose and went to Jimenez, where he still sat at the piano, his hands dumbly wandering over the keys. "You are a great master," I said, "a wonderful performer. But do you know what your music suggests?" He met my fixed gaze, shrugged his shoulders, and shook his head. "Crime," I whispered. "You have roused in me evil thoughts of which I am ashamed. I did not think that it was possible to so divine an art." He smiled, and his eyes glittered with the steely brightness of stars in wintry night. "Art takes its colors from the mind of dear friend," he said. "If you discover evil suggestions in music, the evil, I fear, must be within your own nature." Or in yours," I said quickly. "Or in mine," he agreed coldly. I have often told you I am no saint." I stood hesitatingly looking at him. For one moment his great personal beauty appeared hateful to me, though I knew not why. Then the feeling of distrust and repulsion slowly passed, leaving me humiliated and abashed. "Pardon me, Lucio," I murmured regretfully. "I spoke in haste, but truly your music almost put me in a state of frenzy. I never heard anything in the least like it." "Nor I," said Lady Sybil, who just then moved towards the piano. "It was marvelous. Do you know, it quite frightened me." "I'm sorry," he answered with penitent air. "I know I am quite a failure as a pianist. I am not sufficiently restrained, and as the pressmen would say—" "A failure? Good God," exclaimed Lord Elton at this juncture. "Why, if you played like that in public, you'd drive everyone frantic." "With alarm?" queried Lucio, laughing. "Or with disgust?" "Nonsense. You know that what I mean very well. I have always had a contempt for the piano as an instrument, but by Jove, I have never heard such music as yours, even in full orchestra. It's extraordinary. It's positively magnificent. Where in the world did you learn to study?" "In Nature's conservatory," replied Jimenez lazily. My first maestro was an amiable nightingale. He, singing on a branch of fir when the moon was full, explained with liquid-noted patience how to construct and produce a pure roulade, cadenza, and a trill. And when I learned thus far, he showed me all the most elaborate methods of applying rhythmic tune to the upward and downward rush of the wind, thus supplying me with perfect counterpoint chords I learned from old Neptune, who was good enough to toss a few of his largest bellows the shore for my special benefit. He nearly deafened me with his instructions, being somewhat excitable and loud-voiced, but on finding me an apt pupil, he drew back his waves to himself with so much delicacy among the pebbles and sand that at once I mastered the secret of playing arpeggi. Once, too, I had finishing lesson from a dream, a mystic thing with wild hair and wings. It sang one word in my ears, and the word was unpronounceable in mortal speech, but after many efforts I discovered it lurking in the scale of sound. The best part of it all was that my instructors asked no fees. "I think you're a poet as well as a musician," said Lady Sybil. "A poet? Oh, spare me, my dear young lady. Why are you so cruel as to load me with a vile and imputation? Better be a murderer than a poet. One is treated with much more respect and courteous consideration by the press than by any rate a murderer's breakfast menu will be given due place in many of the most estimable journals. But the poet's lack of both breakfast and dinner will be deemed his fitting reward. Call me a livestock producer, a horse breeder, a timber merchant, anything but a poet. Why, even Tennyson became an amateur milkman to somewhat conceal the excuse of shame and degradation of writing verse." We all laughed. "Well, you must admit," said Lord Elton, "that we've had rather too much of poets lately. It's no wonder we're sick of them, and that poetry has fallen into disrepute. Poets are such quarrelsome lot too, effeminate, pulling unmanly humbugs." "You are speaking of the newly discovered ones, of course," said Lucio. "Yes, they are a weedy collection. I have sometimes thought that out of pure philanthropy, I would start a bonbon manufactory and employ them to write mottos for the crackers. It would keep them out of mischief and provide them with a little pocket money, for as matters stand, they do not make a farthing by their books. But I do not call them poets at all. They are mere rhymers. One or two real poets do exist, but like the prophets of Scripture, they are not in society, nor can they get their logs rolled by any of their contemporaries. They are not favorites with any set. That is why I'm afraid my dear friend Tempest will never be accepted as the genius he is. Society will be too fond of him to let him go down into the dust and ashes and gather the laurel." "It is not necessary to go down to the dust and ashes for that," I said. "Oh, I assure you it is," he answered gaily. "Positively imperative. The laurel flourishes to hear you sing, Prince." She said, "Will you give us that pleasure? Do something quite simple, you know. It will set our nerves straight after your terribly beautiful music. You'd hardly believe it, perhaps, but I really feel quite unstrung." He unfolded his hand with a droll air of penitence. "Forgive me," he said. "I'm always, as the church service says, doing those things I ought not to do." Miss Chesney laughed a trifle nervously. "Oh, I forgive you," she replied, "on condition that you sing." "I obey." And with that, he turned again to the piano, and playing a strange, wild minor accompaniment, sang the following stanzas. "Sleep, my beloved, sleep. Be patient, we shall keep our secret closely hid beneath the coffin lid. There is no other place in earth or air for such a love as ours, or such despair. And neither hell nor heaven shall care to win our loathed souls rejoicing in their sin. Sleep, for my hand is sure, the cold steel bright and pure strikes through thy heart and mine, shedding our blood like wine. Sin's sweetness is too sweet, and if the shame of love must be our curse, we hurl the blame back on the gods who gave us love with breath and tortured us from passion and unto death. This extraordinary song, sung in the most glorious of baritones, full and rich and vibrating with power and sweetness, had a visibly thrilling effect upon us all. Again, we were struck dumb with surprise and something like fear, and again Diana Chesney broke the silence. "You call that simple?" she said half petulantly. "Quite so. Love and death are the simplest things in the world," replied Lucio. "The ballad is a mere trifle. It is entitled The Last Love Song, and is supposed to be the utterance of a lover about to kill his mistress and himself. Such events happen every day. You know that by the news, perhaps. They are perfectly commonplace." He was interrupted by a sharp, clear voice ringing imperatively across the room. "Where did you learn that song?" Chapter 14. It was the paralyzed countess who spoke. She had managed to partly raise herself on her couch, and her face expressed positive terror. Her husband hurried to her side, and, with a curiously cynical smile on his lips, Jimenez rose from the piano. Miss Charlotte, who had sat rigidly upright and silent for some time, hastened to attend upon her sister, but Lady Elton was singularly excited and appeared to have gained a sudden access of unnatural vigor. "Go away. I am not ill," she said impatiently. "I feel better, much better than I have done in months. The music does me good." And addressing her husband, she added, "Ask your friend to come and sit here by me. I want to talk to him. He has a magnificent voice, and I know that song he sang. I remember reading it in a manuscript album long ago. I want to know where he found it." Jimenez here advanced with his gentle tread and courteous bearing, and Lord Elton gave him a chair beside the invalid. You are working miracles on my life," he said. "I have not seen her so animated in years." And leaving the two to talk, he crossed over to where Lady Sybil himself, myself, and Miss Chesney were, all seated in a group, chatting more or less unrestrainedly. "I've just been expressing the hope that you and your daughter will pay me a visit at Willowsmere, Lord Elton," I said. His brows contracted a little, but he forced a smile. We shall be delighted," he murmured. When do you take possession?" "As soon as it is all feasible," I replied. "I shall wait in town till the next levee is over, as both my friend and myself have arranged to be presented." Yes, that is always advisable, and it's not half such troublesome business as drawing room is for the ladies. It's soon over. And low bolus of not rigueur. Ha 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 ha. "Who is your presenter?" I named a distinguished personage closely connected with the court, and the Earl nodded. "Oh, very good man. You could not have a better," he said complacently. "And this book of yours, when does it come out?" "Next week." "Oh, we must get it. We must certainly get it," said Lord Elton, assuming interest. "Sybil, you must put it down on your library list." He assented, though, as I thought, a trifle indifferently. "On the contrary, you must allow me to present it to you," I said. "It will be a pleasure to me, which I hope you will not deny." You're very kind," she answered, lifting her beautiful eyes to mine as she spoke. "But the librarian at Mardy's is sure to lend it. He knows I read everything, though I confess I never buy any books except those by Mavis Clare." Again that woman's name. I felt annoyed, but took care not to show my annoyance. "I shall be jealous of Mavis Clare," I said playfully. "Most men are," she replied quietly. "You are indeed an enthusiastic partisan of hers," I exclaimed, somewhat surprised. "Yes, I suppose I am. I like to see any members of my sex distinguish herself as nobly as she does. I have no genius of my own, and that is one of the reasons why I honor it so much in other women. I was about to make some suitable compliment by the way of response to this remark when we were all violently startled from our seats by a most horrible cry, a gasping scream, such as might be wrung from some tortured animal. Aghast at the sound, we stood for a moment, inert, staring at Jimenez, who came quickly towards us with an air of grave concern. "I am afraid," he said, "that the Countess is not so well. Perhaps you'd better go to her." Another shriek interrupted his words, and, transfixed with horror, we saw Lady Elton struggling in the throes of some sudden and terrific convulsion, her hands beating the air as if she were fighting with an unseen enemy. In 1 second, her face underwent such hideous contortions as robbed it all of human resemblance, and between the agonized pantings of her difficult breath, her half-choked voice could be heard uttering wild cries. "Mercy, mercy, O God, God, O God! Tell Sybil, pray, to God, pray!" And with that, she fell heavily back, speechless and unconscious. All was instant confusion. Lady Sybil rushed to her mother's side. With Miss Charlotte, Diana Chesney hung back, trembling and afraid. Lord Elton sprang to the bell and rang it furiously. "Fetch the doctor," he cried to the startled servant. "Lady Elton has had another shock. She must be taken to her room at once." "Can I be of any service?" I inquired. With a side glance at Jimenez, who stood gravely apart, a statuesquely composed figure of silence. No, thanks all the same," said the Earl, and pressed my hand gratefully. "She should not have come downstairs. It has been too exciting for her. Sybil, don't look at her, my dear. It will only unnerve you. Miss Chesney, pray go to your room. Charlotte can do all of that as possible." As he spoke, 2 of the men servants came to carry the insensible Countess upstairs, and as they slowly bore her on her coffin-like couch past me, one of them drew the covers let across her face to conceal it, but not so quickly that I could not see the awful change impressed upon it, the indelible horror that was stamped on the drawn features, horror such as surely never was seen except in a painter's idea of some lost soul in torment. The eyes were rolled up and fixed in their sockets like balls of glass, and in them was frozen the same frenzied, desperate look of fear. It was a dreadful face, so dreadful in its ghastly immovables that I was all at once reminded of my hideous vision of the previous night and the pallid countenances of the 3 phantoms, and that had scared me in my sleep. Lady Elton's looks now resembled theirs. Sickened and appalled, I averted my eyes and was glad to see Jimenez taking farewell of his host, the while he expressed his regret and sympathy with him in his domestic affliction. I myself, approaching Lady Sybil, pressed her cold and trembling hand in mine and respectfully kissed it. "I am deeply sorry," I murmured. "I wish I could do anything to console you." She looked at me with dry, calm eyes. "Thank you, but the doctors have always said that my mother would have another shock depriving her of speech. It is very sad. She will probably live for some years like that." I again expressed my sympathy. "May I come down and inquire about you at all tomorrow?" I asked. It would be very kind of you," she answered quietly. Shall I see you if I come?" I said in a lower tone. "If you wish, certainly." Our eyes met, and I knew by instinct that she read my thoughts. I pressed her hand again, and was not repulsed. Then, bowing profoundly, I left her to make my adieu to Lord Elton and Miss Chesney, who seemed terribly upset and frightened. Miss Charlotte Fitzroy had left the room in attendance on her sister, and she did not return to bid us good night. Jimenez lingered for a moment behind me to say another word or two to the Earl, and when he joined me in the hall and threw on his opera coat, he was smiling to himself somewhat singularly. "An unpleasant end for Helen the Countess of Elton," he said when we were in our brougham driving away. Paralysis is perhaps the worst of it all, the physical punishments that can befall a rapid lady. Was she rapid? Well, perhaps rapid is too mild a term, but I can find no other, he answered. When she was young, she is barely 50 now, she did everything that could be done by a woman at her worst and wildest. She had scores of lovers, and I believe one of them cleared off her husband's turf debts, the Earl consenting gladly on a rather pressing occasion. What a disgraceful conduct, I exclaimed. He looked at me with an expression of cynical amusement. Think so? The upper tens quite condone that sort of thing in their own set nowadays. It's all right. If a lady has lovers and her husband beams benevolence on the situation, what can be said? Nothing. Now, very tender your conscience is. How very tender your conscience is, Geoffrey. I sat silent thinking. My companion lit a cigarette and offered me one. I took it mechanically without lighting it. I made a mistake this evening, he went on. I should not have sung that last love song. The fact is that words were written by one of her ladyship's former admirers, a man who was something of a poet in his way, and she had an idea that she was the only person living who had ever seen the lines. She wanted to know if I knew the man who composed them, and I was able to say that I did, very intimately. I was just explaining how it was and why I knew him so well when the distressing attack of convulsions came on and finished our conversation. She looked horrible, I said. The paralyzed Helen of modern Troy, yes, her countenance at the last was certainly not attractive. Beauty combined with wantonness frequently ends in the drawn twitch, fixed eye, and helpless limbs of life in death. It's nature's revenge on the outraged body. And do you know eternity's revenge on the impure soul is extremely similar? What do you know about it? I said, smiling in spite of myself as I looked at his face, expressive of perfect health and splendid intellectuality. Your absurd fancies about the soul are the only traces of folly I discover in you. Really? Well, I'm glad I have something of a fool in my disposition, foolishness being the only quality that makes wisdom possible. I confess I have very odd notions about the soul. I would excuse them, I said, laughing. God forgive me in my own insensate, blind conceit. The whole he regarded me fixedly. In fact, I will excuse anything for your sake of your voice. I do not flatter you, Lucio. You sing like an angel. Don't use impossible comparisons, he replied. Have you ever heard an angel sing? Yes, I answered, smiling. I have, this very night. He turned deadly pale. A very open compliment, he said, forcing a laugh, and with almost rough haste, he suddenly let down the window of the carriage. Though the night was bitter cold. This vehicle is suffocating me. Let's have some air. See how the stars are shining like great crown jewels, deities' regalia. Hard frost, like hard times, brings noble works into prominence. Yonder, far off, is a star you can hardly perceive, red as a cinder at times, and again blue as lightning. I can always discover it, though many cannot. It is Algol, judged by superstitious folk to be an evil star. I love it chiefly on the account of its bad reputation. It is no doubt much maligned. It may be a cold quarter of hell where weeping spirits sit frozen in ice made of their own congealed tears, or it may be a preparatory school for heaven. Who knows? Yonder too shines Venus, your star, Geoffrey. You are in love, my friend. Come, confess it. Are you not? I'm not sure, I answered slowly. The phrase in love scarcely describes my present feeling. You have dropped these, he said suddenly, picking up a fast fading knot of violets from the floor of the brougham and holding them towards me. He smiled as I uttered an exclamation of annoyance. They were Lady Sybil's flowers, which I had inadvertently let fall, and I saw he knew it. I took them from his hand in silence. My dear fellow, do not try to hide your intentions from your best friend, he said seriously and kindly. You wish to marry the Earl of Elton's beautiful daughter, and you shall trust me. I will do everything I can to promote your desire. You will? I exclaimed with unconcealed delight, for I fully recognized the influence he had over Sybil's father. I will, I promise, he answered gravely. I assure you that such a marriage would be one after my own heart. I'll do all I can for you, and I have made many matches in my time. My heart beat high with triumph, and when we had parted that night, I wrung his hand fervently and told him I was devoutly grateful to the fates for sending me such a good friend as he was. Grateful to whom, did you say? He asked with whimsical look. To the fates. Are you really? They are very ugly sisters. I believe perhaps they were your ghostly visitors of last night. God forbid, I ejaculated. Ah, God never forbids the fulfillment of his own laws, he answered. To do so, he would have to destroy himself, if he exists at all, I said carelessly. True, if. And with this, we separated to our different quarters in the Grand. And with that, I bid you, my lovelies, a most beautiful night. Bonne nuit. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I do hope that everything came up. I don't know why I never see anyone in the chat, but I'm glad that I saw numbers. Good to see you. Thank you so much. Find me on Patreon. That's the best way of supporting. Love to you. Take care. Good night.